welcome to Everything Marketplaces, where we talk with marketplace founders and leaders from some of today's top marketplaces. So this is episode 19, and I'm excited to welcome on Ravi Mehta, who's an incredible product mind that's built and led product teams at top marketplaces and companies like Tinder, Facebook, and Tripadvisor. So before we jump into this chat and dive into everything about product, I'd like to give a big thanks to Victoria Young for the intro to Ravi and making this group chat possible. So Ravi, you shared quite a bit about product with some of your writing and built products that are used by millions that we probably all know of. But let's maybe start off by sharing a bit about your background and how you got on marketplaces for those that don't know you.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks for having me. I'm super excited for the conversation today and get to know everyone. So I've been in tech my whole life. I actually started in tech when I was very young. My dad brought home a computer when I was 9 years old, and there wasn't much to do back then other than to learn how to program. So I started to learn how to program when I was really young and really fell in love with programming and building and gaming at the time. So the first things that I was creating were games. I did that all throughout growing up, and then launched some shareware games in high school, and then decided to start a commercial game company in college. So I dropped out of college for a little bit. Did that full time, but promised myself I would go back and finish up my degree. So I finished up my computer engineering degree, and then graduated at a really interesting time. It was right in the middle of the first web bubble. And so there was tons of opportunities. I thought I would go into a software engineering position, but met some folks from Microsoft. And at the time they said, look, we're going to be making a really big investment into games. Why don't you come on board? And I came on board as a product manager rather than a software engineer. And shortly after I started, that major investment in games turned out to be the Xbox team. So I joined as one of the first 20 or so people on the Xbox team and did a lot of early thinking about online gaming and what Microsoft could really do within the space that was different than what Nintendo and Sony were doing, given that Microsoft had a much deeper understanding of where things were going from an internet perspective. So I had a great time there. I spent 6 years there thinking about online gaming, both from the Xbox Live platform perspective, as well as from the content perspective. After that, I spent a couple years in business school, and then really wanted to get back to entrepreneurial roots. And so right after school, my first sort of exposure to marketplaces was I helped found a lead generation company for the financial services industry. And we were creating a marketplace where the demand was driven through long tail search engine marketing campaigns, and the supply was a set of financial advisors and planners that we established relationships with. So that was really my first kind of exposure to how to build marketplace businesses. From there, I went to Viximo, which is a company focused on providing tools for social game developers and social app developers. And so we were actually the market maker. So the market was the consumers on one side, the game developers and platforms on the other side, and we were providing a lot of the plumbing. So I was there for about 5 years. We eventually sold that to a mobile advertising company called Tapjoy. And then from there, I joined Tripadvisor, and I was at Tripadvisor during a really interesting period from a marketplace perspective, where Tripadvisor was moving from a very content-driven platform to much more of a transactional marketplace. So moving from a review site into really aspiring to be the Amazon for travel. And during that period, I led the consumer product teams there, thinking a lot about the transactional elements of the hotels, restaurants, and attractions businesses, as well as the core product infrastructure that we needed in order to enable those marketplaces. And then most recently, about 3 years ago, I joined Facebook on a team specifically focused on teenagers and how they engage with social media. And so did a lot of thinking about where social is going and what Facebook's product offerings need to be for that demographic. And then spent about a year as the chief product officer at Tinder, really helping with two things. One was helping them think through their Gen Z strategy. And the second thing was really professionalizing their product organization and bringing in a lot of the tools and the techniques I've gained over the years in terms of scaling large product teams. And so since February or so, I've been exploring a couple of different things, one of which is I just launched a direct-to-patient healthcare marketplace, working with a team at a company called Sesame. So happy to talk through more about that. That's been a really interesting marketplace experience because the patient-doctor marketplace, the healthcare marketplace, has been intermediated by health insurance companies for so long that actually opening up that up comes with some interesting marketplace challenges. And then I've also been exploring some startup opportunities. And then this fall, I've started as an EAR at Reforge, where I'll be teaching a course on product strategy.
Wow, so that's quite the experience and background. So let's maybe start by kind of taking a step back and talking about Tripadvisor, since you mentioned that was at an interesting time. I know there's quite a few marketplace founders within the group that are also exploring maybe kind of shifting into more transactional based marketplaces. So what were some of the maybe kind of like product insights and business considerations that were involved with your time there?
I think the first thing is to think about, within the marketplace, where are you initially constrained? Are you supply constrained or are you demand constrained? Often in the beginning, there's a chicken and egg problem where you're kind of moving from one side to another, and you're doing that really, really quickly to build the marketplace up. But rather than focusing on both simultaneously, which you can do, it's often helpful to say, where's the weak link in the chain right now? And if we were really to significantly increase demand, or we were really significantly to increase supply, what would happen to the business? And then get to a point where you've sort of shifted the weak link in the chain because you strengthened that particular part of the marketplace. And so for Tripadvisor, when Tripadvisor began thinking about things from a transactional perspective, Tripadvisor was a really demand-rich marketplace. As it kind of shifted to thinking about itself as a marketplace, there's a lot of organic traffic coming in through all of the great SEO work that had been done, really strong paid search capability, really great direct usage as well, great CRM capabilities. And so there were millions of users on Tripadvisor every month coming to Tripadvisor for information. And so the question was, how, instead of selling that traffic to Expedia and Booking, does the company build up a base of connections directly with suppliers in order to start being the place where people come for the transactions? And so the first place where Tripadvisor really started to build out that capability was by adding instant booking for hotels. And Tripadvisor took a really interesting strategy where it wasn't a matter of like instantly moving from a content-oriented product to a marketplace product. Instead, the first integrations were large supplier aggregators like Booking.com, like Expedia. So Tripadvisor was taking kind of an Amazon seller type model, working with aggregators to bring a whole bunch of supply online at the same time so that people can transact directly on the platform. And then on a case-by-case basis, working with direct suppliers like Marriott or individual boutique hotels to bring direct access to the supply into the marketplace. So that was like an interesting example of a demand-rich marketplace and how you very quickly in a demand-rich marketplace add in a base of supply and then start to iterate on that base of supply and get more direct access and then better transactional experiences with direct suppliers.
Nice. Thanks for sharing more on that. So what was the kind of like product team makeup like at that point?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think org structures are almost always in constant improvement. At the time, and it's kind of interesting to look at how Tripadvisor's evolved over time. So when I got to Tripadvisor, it was very much a functional org structure with a team focused on hotels, a team focused on restaurants. There was a personalization team. There were a mobile team. And then over time, we really started to codify the product structure into three elements. The first one were business line teams. So you'd have an entire product team focused on a particular part of the business that would ultimately have P&L responsibility. So you'd have like the hotels team or the restaurants team. Then there was core product teams, which were teams that were responsible for the connective tissue between those different parts of the marketplace. So that included things like trip planning, personalization, mobile, social. And then the third piece was international, because oftentimes the international challenges, especially within the travel marketplace, are pretty different from market to market. And so it was important to have a dedicated team that was focused on making sure that from an international market development standpoint, the market had, or the product had really good product market fit. And then from a localization standpoint, that it felt as good as the best local competitors.
Interesting. And then maybe what would you, before we kind of move on to after in Tinder, what would you say probably was one of the biggest challenges that you faced at the time as a marketplace leading
At Tinder?
Sorry, before we move on to Tinder, so at Tripadvisor. Okay.
Yeah, I think the biggest, there were a couple of interesting challenges. One of the ones that was interesting and unexpected was that Tripadvisor was a demand-rich marketplace, and so had a lot of traffic to drive transactions, but actually becoming the place that people trust for those transactions was more difficult than we had anticipated. And so, there's the idea that if you have traffic on your platform, that you'll be able to add in transactions, and people will naturally want to move through the path of least resistance. Why go to another site to book your hotel when you can book directly on Tripadvisor? So the initial thinking was that removal of friction, the ability to do everything all in one place, was going to be a tailwind for the business. But instead, what was really interesting, I think, from a consumer marketplace standpoint, is that Booking, Expedia, the direct suppliers like Marriott and Starwood had built up a lot of trust and credibility with customers. And the transaction, especially a monetary transaction for users, is very sacred. And so who they're willing to give their money to is something that is based partly on rational experiences. They've had good experiences in the past, so they trust that company, and then partly based on sort of an irrational fear of what might happen if I give my credit card to a new company. Or one of the interesting things with travel was people are actually conscious of marketplaces and where you sit, and so people were reluctant to book with Tripadvisor. They're like, why don't I just book directly with the hotel? Because if I have a problem, I want to be able to go to the hotel while I'm like checking in, rather than going to Tripadvisor. And so I think a really interesting marketplace learning from that was to think very deeply about the user experience, very empathetically with the user experience, and think about how your marketplace is going to become the trusted means by which a person transacts within the marketplace, and why that's better than going directly to the supplier. Amazon has done this beautifully. You're able to get incredibly good products at incredible prices through the Amazon marketplace. And I trust when I make a transaction on Amazon, even if I'm buying a product from a seller I've never heard of at a price that seems too good to be true, I know that Amazon will take care of me if I have a problem with that product. And in many cases, I'm buying products that are generics or that come from suppliers that are super low cost suppliers that I would never trust to give my credit card to, but I'm happy purchasing that product because Amazon has built that trust layer.
Nice. I think that's a really great point with the trust. So let's maybe jump over to Tinder, because it's I think overlooked as one of the largest and kind of most obvious marketplaces. But at what point did you join Tinder?
So I joined in 2019. So the point at which I joined Tinder, Tinder's kind of interesting because it had product market fit from the get-go. It's been on a rocket ship ever since it launched. One of the big changes over the last 3 years is the focus on monetization. So if you look at the track record of the company, the revenue has increased really significantly. It's also continued to grow from a monthly active user standpoint pretty significantly. If you look at the dating space and you look at the monthly active usage, Tinder's sort of in a class of its own. And I think that has to do with a couple of things. One of them is when people use dating apps, they tend to use more than one. And one of the ones today that they just use by default is Tinder, because they know that's where the most people are, and they know that's where they'll get the most matches, which is an interesting marketplace element in and of itself. If you have multiple marketplaces and you have demand that has a need, they're willing to go to multiple marketplaces to make sure that they can find what they're looking for. And then the second thing is that Tinder is actually less prescriptive about what people are looking for than other dating apps. There's no specific search, there's no filters. It's really about like this kind of serendipitous connection with people. And so people use it for a broader set of use cases. And then people use it when they're not quite sure what they're looking for. So as a result of those two things, like Tinder has become, the #1 app in this space and has a really strong position within that space. And so I joined at a point when it was monetizing really well, when it had really good reach in the tens of millions of users, where Tinder was thinking about like scaling the product team, as well as what the next generation of Tinder looks like and how to make sure that the Tinder of tomorrow is as relevant, especially for younger users, as the Tinder of today.
Nice. And I believe you work with Jeff Morris there.
I did work with Jeff. Yeah.
Nice. He's great. So I mean, I definitely speak from experience. I've used Tinder in the past. So what were some of the interesting kind of insights there and challenges that you guys faced?
It is interesting. The marketplace analogy does work to some extent, but you have to shift it a little bit. I think generally, like, there's not supply and demand in the classic sense, but the two sides that you're trying to match together are people that are getting a lot of inbound right swipes, and then people who are not getting as many inbound right swipes. Typically that breaks along gender lines. So women are getting more right swipes on a given day than men are. And that also breaks along gender lines in terms of how many right swipes are getting sent out. And so when you think about the ecosystem in that way, then the job becomes kind of similar to a marketplace job, which is how do you connect the people who aren't getting a lot of right swipes with the people who are receiving a lot or sending a lot, so that you can get a match to happen. So ultimately, the same way that you focus on driving transactions in a marketplace on Tinder, you will also think about, how do we drive matches? And ultimately, more matches in the system is sort of like transactions within a marketplace. It's better for the ecosystem. A lot of Tinder's monetization too is based on the idea that, the more matches you get, matches are ultimately the value for users. And so a lot of the monetization is oriented around helping people get more matches. What's interesting and different than a marketplace is that the match may be the initial sort of transaction that gets that makes the market. But there's a whole phase after the match, which is the conversation that people have, and whether or not that conversation leads to a deeper connection, potentially moving that connection to Snap or Instagram or other places. And so, there's some elements of like thinking about marketplaces that really make sense. And then there's some elements of thinking about social that really make sense. And so it's sort of an interesting combination of the structure of social apps, which are in themselves marketplaces, they're more content marketplaces, and the structure of more transactional marketplaces.
Nice. Yeah, I feel like there's so much we could dive into talking about with that, with social and your gaming background too. So maybe just for the sake of time, let's kind of talk about a little bit more about Sesame. I'd love to learn more about, about that and what you're working on right now with marketplaces.
Yeah, Sesame is really fascinating. The company is founded by David Goldhill, who's been, he was a very successful media executive. He was the head of GSN for a while. And he got really interested in fixing the American healthcare system when his father passed away from a medical error. And so he wanted to understand, why did that medical error happen? What were the incentives behind that? How could it be prevented? And so he spent the last, I think it's been more than a decade, really focused on understanding the American healthcare system and talking about how it can be fixed. And so a few years ago, a lot of things were changing around the Affordable Care Act, around access to direct healthcare, around the incentives for doctors, the incentives for health insurance, the fact that there's now more people that are uninsured. And so he decided to start a company and with the ultimate mission of building an open marketplace for healthcare, with the goal that that open marketplace would then be a really key part of the solution around American healthcare. And so initially there was even a question about whether or not that marketplace is feasible. Would doctors be willing to list their services directly to patients? Would they be willing to list services at prices that were transparent to patients? One of the weird things about the healthcare marketplace is it's a marketplace that's driven by a third-party payer. So oftentimes the demand in the marketplace, the patient never even knows how much the transaction costs, or if they do know, they find out at a later date when that price comes at a surprise, as a surprise. And so it creates these really perverse incentives where, people don't think about the cost of healthcare until it's too late and until it's actually having a financial impact on them. So the first question was, could you create a marketplace where doctors were willing to actually supply their services in a way that was more transparent than currently existed in the healthcare marketplaces, and at prices that were affordable and transparent? And the company found pretty quickly that there was a pent-up appetite for doctors to be able to do that. Doctors are, many doctors, especially independent doctors, are entrepreneurs and small business owners. They have the same sort of thinking that any entrepreneur or small business owner would have about how to grow their business, about how to maintain their business, about where they want to spend their time. But they've operated in this market where they have to deal more with insurance. They have to spend a lot of time on paperwork. A lot of times doctors feel like their hands are sort of tied in terms of being able to provide the care that they need. So one of the things that's interesting that's happening in the medical field is there's a group of primary care physicians that have now said, look, we're not going to take health insurance at all. If you want to get see us as a patient, we'll just charge you a monthly subscription. It's sort of like a SaaS model. And we'll take care of all of your healthcare unless you have some needs that are beyond the typical primary care needs. And so in that way, they're offering a product that's different than health insurance. So Sesame initially was able to tap into this real pent-up desire on the doctor side, on the supply side, to connect more directly to the patient and have more control over growing their business. And then the second question, something I've been working a lot on over the last couple months, is when you do that, how do you then surface that supply into a patient in a way that they can understand and they can make really smart decisions? The first thing is transparency around pricing, which Sesame has done a really good job with. And so, oftentimes you can get services on Sesame for much lower price than you can through the health insurance system. So for example, an MRI is often $400 or $450 when you buy it directly on Sesame. But that equivalent MRI would be $2,500 or more if you go through health insurance. And then with deductibles, you don't even know how much the patient's going to be accountable for. So the first thing was actually getting prices. The second thing was being able to enable patients to more easily navigate their product, the list of services available, and understand what healthcare services they need. So we spent a lot of time putting a merchandising layer on top of an open marketplace to give patients more information, more content, more assistance in making the decision about what they need within that marketplace. So it's been an interesting combination of both opening up the marketplace as well as helping to curate and present the marketplace to the demand side.
Nice. That's super interesting, and thanks for breaking it down. So it does sound like quite the challenge. Introducing kind of a marketplace, within within that industry. So, like, what was I guess when did you join? Like, what phase?
I joined. It's a Series A company. I joined about 4 months ago as interim CPO. I just hired a CPO there. And in that time, we did a couple of things. We did sort of a rebuild of the product around this idea that we needed to have a better consumer discovery experience for people that were shopping for healthcare. And we did a rebrand to really put emphasis on the sort of modern approach that Sesame's offering to how people get healthcare.
Oh, nice.
It's been a pretty intense 4 months now.
Yeah, I can imagine. So from, what are some of the challenges that you faced, I would say, like on the supply side, maybe regulatory or compliance?
There's one of the interesting things that has changed. So there's kind of two interesting things that have changed on the supply side. One is that telehealth has gone from sort of like a tangential thing within the healthcare industry to the primary way in which people get care. And so that's happened because of COVID. Like people, have not, because of social distancing measures, there's been less in-person interactions, particularly within the healthcare space where people don't want to expose themselves in person to a healthcare environment where they might run the risk of getting infected. And so telehealth went from kind of on the periphery, not a lot of people are using it, to now patients are comfortable with it and doctors are more comfortable with it. The other thing that really changed from a regulatory standpoint is there used to have to be, state by state regulation about whether or not you could offer telehealth, and that got lifted right after COVID, so that a much wider set of providers are able to provide telehealth across a much wider part of the country. So that's really helped build the telehealth marketplace, not just for Sesame, but for other providers as well. So that really opened up. And then the second thing is that because of the Affordable Care Act and sort of like changing requirements there, doctors have gotten more open to listing services directly. It used to be that insurance companies would want to make sure that whatever a doctor was providing, that they were providing the same price to the insurance company. And so that really inhibited doctors from being able to offer services and prices directly to patients. But that has changed. And so now doctors have more ability to offer those services directly to patients. So that's also changed from a regulatory standpoint. And so those are kind of two dynamics in the market that have really helped open things up. The other thing, which is not like a regulatory dynamic, but is an important dynamic, is because of COVID, there's now a large influx of people that are either uninsured or underinsured, millions of new people. And so there needs to be a solution for those people within the healthcare market. Health insurance companies aren't providing it. Healthcare providers want to provide it. A doctor doesn't want to not see a patient that they've been caring for because they now don't have their job, they don't have health insurance. So this is a way for them to connect directly with the patients that they've been serving, and so they can give those patients continuity of care, even if that person hasn't had continuity of insurance or continuity of employment.
Nice. Yeah, I feel like there's an overwhelming need for it right now, more than ever. So with that said, how do you kind of or do you like kind of sequence, how far deep within that are you a transactional marketplace or?
Yeah, Sesame is a transactional marketplace. So you book ahead of time at a predetermined price. So let's say you want to go in for you're having migraines, you want to go in for a consultation. There might be a migraine consultation available for $70, maybe $40 telehealth. You can pick whether or not you want to see someone in person or via telehealth. And then, you book ahead of time. And so you pay up front for the booking when you book it. And it gives you a confirmed time. And, you can visit that doctor at that time via video, or you can visit them in person. So it really reduces the amount of time patients are spending in the waiting room. It increases the transparency around how much they're going to pay. And then for doctors, one of the really important things is that people don't think about how difficult collections is for doctors. Doctors have to spend a lot of time actually collecting payment from the insurance companies, and then they don't know whether the insurance companies are actually going to compensate them. So then they get kind of stuck with the bill if the insurance company doesn't contact them, and now they need to collect from the patient, which is kind of a weird thing to do within a patient-doctor relationship. So a lot of independent practices are spending way too much time collecting, and so the fact that someone's paying up front makes them comfortable to offer a lower upfront price, because they know they're not have to deal with that challenge or hassle of collecting payment.
Got it. Thanks for sharing more on that. So I feel like you
absolutely.
and I could just chat about things the whole time. So I don't want to take up the whole group chat for just you and I talking about this. But yeah, we're going to jump into some questions here in a little bit. Before we do, is there anything that you wanted to share with us, kind of given your past experience? Maybe that would be insightful for us as everyone from idea stage to a little bit later stage marketplace founders.
Yeah, I think the thing that I've learned kind of looking at very different marketplaces, from Tinder to Sesame to Facebook to Tripadvisor, is that marketplaces do share a lot of similar dynamics. Ultimately, I think marketplace businesses are really interesting for entrepreneurs, because if you can find a market that's underserved, there's a much higher probability chance that you can build a really interesting business in that space than if you're working on another product where it's not as clear. There's already economic transactions happening, and so if you can make those economic transactions more valuable, lower costs, more streamlined, you can build a really interesting business. I think the principles that I've learned is, you really have to think distinctly about demand side and supply side. There are separate challenges with those. One of the things that we haven't talked about is the demand side in online marketplaces is getting increasingly challenging. From a paid demand standpoint, it's really Google and Facebook. Their prices are increasing. SEO is still an important tactic within marketplaces, and we can talk more about that. But the benefits that you can get, the ability to really dominate that channel, are lessening unless you're in a very unique marketplace that Google doesn't have great content for. When you're advertising on Google for larger marketplaces, you're both working with Google as a partner as well as competing with Google. So a really important thing from a demand standpoint is to think about how are you going to profitably get users? How are you going to initially use Facebook and Google to get your customers? But then really key is a shift from Google and Facebook dependence into having a direct relationship with those customers. So for marketplaces where transactions only happen every once in a while, very important to think about like what's the connective tissue between those transactions and how do you maintain that relationship with the customer and get them coming directly rather than having to reacquire every time. And for marketplaces where transactions are happening more often, that gets easier. And then on the supply side, I think it's really dependent on the marketplace that you're building. But if you can, small business owners are often a lot more rational than users, and if you can offer a way to make their lives easier, make their business more valuable, you can aggregate supply pretty consistently, not easily, but consistently in those spaces.
Awesome. Cool. So we're going to jump into questions. I'm going to save a question for myself about the demand side and SEO here in a little bit. But Richard, did you want to come on and ask a question that you had?
Yes, I'd like to. Thank you very much. And very nice to meet you, Ravi. And Rumi, nice to meet you. This is my first Everything Marketplaces call, so a pleasure to join everyone. Ravi, I'm the founder of Citizenshipper. I founded the company in 2008. We're a marketplace that connects transportation providers with people who are looking to transport difficult to move items. And we're really starting to focus on pet transport. So we're popular with breeders and folks who are adopting pets from out of state. And our average transaction fee is close to $100. So there's quite an incentive from the customer side to go off-site and to try and find the contact information of these transportation providers without staying on-site. And I was just taking a look at Sesame, and I wondered if you could say a little bit more about the business model, which side of the marketplace you charge and what's the model. And if platform leakage is a problem for you, I took a look and it has the doctors' names on it. So how do you keep people on platform?
Yeah, it's a really good question. In fact, for successful platforms that have some traction, one of the biggest problems is disintermediation. So, when you're trying to establish that long-term relationship between a supplier and a customer, it's important for you to be able to add enough value that it doesn't make sense to cut you out of the equation. I think specifically to your business, one interesting business to look at is bike flights. They do something very similar, but they do it for bicycle transportation. And they work with a lot of local bike shops and shippers, and they just do a fantastic job of streamlining that whole experience in a way that makes them not prone to disintermediation, because if a customer were to actually put all those pieces together themselves, it would be much more difficult. It would also require a lot of knowledge of different providers and suppliers within the market. And as a result, it's just worth paying a little bit extra to make that whole process streamlined. I think especially in your case, if you think about the human side of it with pets, these are animals, these are things that people really care for. And if you can create the trust and the perception that working with your business, those animals are going to be better cared for and are going to be much safer during the transportation than if a person were to go directly, then that's something that people would really value. And so you're always within marketplaces like this going to have to deal with people who are extremely price conscious and willing to do the extra legwork to disintermediate you. But if you make that legwork and you also factor trust into the equation, then for the majority of customers, they'll be willing to pay a little bit extra for that trust, for that simplicity. And so specifically to the question about Sesame, one of the things that has been philosophically really important for the company is to not hide doctors and not put doctors behind some sort of like double blind shield. We want the patient to feel like they're connecting directly with the doctor, or we want the doctor to feel like they have a relationship with the patient. And so Sesame's goal is ultimately not to be in the middle of that the same way that the health insurance company is, but really connect the two. And the goal is to combat disintermediation through making it really easy for people to pay. Doctors don't want to handle payments. That's something where we can add a lot of value. Having a reputation system so that doctors can establish a really good reputation on the platform and leverage that reputation for demand. Having other value add services like prescriptions that are really easy for the customer, so the customer knows they can get their entire course of care directly through Sesame. In particular, if a person's got a more complicated health issue where they might need to see a primary care physician and then a specialist, and then all have prescriptions, it's going to be much easier for them to have all of that live within one interface rather than disintermediating and going from person to person. And so I think the important lesson, two important lessons I've sort of taken away is, one is trust is really important, and that if you can create trust with the customer, they're willing to pay for it and they're willing to work with you. And then two is that, if you can provide value across multiple suppliers at the same time, that can often create sort of more of a defensible position.
Good. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. That was a great question. And thanks for sharing more, Ravi. So let's see. Rich, did you want to come on?
Hey, Ravi, it's Rich. We're running a vertical managed marketplace, and this relates to SEO. Obviously, massive horizontal marketplaces like Thumbtack have done a great job of SEO over the last few years. They're our kind of key competitor when we're trying to get clicks to our website. They offer a lot of choice to the customer, transparency in price, many designers to choose from, or whatever vertical you're looking at. How do you think managed marketplaces and vertical managed marketplaces can compete against this kind of like huge competitive nature that they've enforced now in the marketplace?
Can you tell me a little bit more about what your marketplace is selling?
Yeah, so ours are an interior design marketplace, interior designers connecting you, but on a more managed level. So we deal with the project management, the furniture sourcing, and kind of own that brand and experience.
Yeah, that's great. I think SEO is getting harder. I think that though, like a lot of companies that have done SEO at scale have done it programmatically. And so oftentimes they're providing answers that are good, but not great to queries, especially long tail queries. If you can identify queries that you can provide a much more curated answer to, then, you can start to really compete against those providers. And the advantage, there's kind of two advantages that vertical marketplaces have. The first one is that you're more committed to that vertical, and so you can go much deeper from a content perspective, and usually create better content for those queries than Thumbtack can. They're going to face sort of like an ROI question of whether or not they really want to invest that level of detail into a particular vertical. And then the second thing I think that's really valuable for vertical marketplaces is that you can go much richer with the type of content that you're building, and go to platforms outside of Google, or do formats that are outside of text. So having a really great YouTube presence, working with influencers on Instagram, working with influencers now on TikTok, enables you to combine SEO with an influencer marketing strategy, and then really own sort of an overall holistic content marketing content marketing surface for customers to interface with, rather than just owning the SEO. Because ultimately, like Thumbtack, Tripadvisor to some extent, they're doing a great job sort of getting the person that has a specific question and answering that question, but then establishing a direct relationship with that customer gets harder. Whereas if you have a great influencer campaign, you have really great YouTube presence, and there's a direct content relationship with you as a vertical marketplace, then they'll begin to see you as a place that they go to really understand how to make decisions within that marketplace. And particularly for interior design, it's a very visual type of thing. So you have a lot of assets in terms of bringing those able into play that Thumbtack may not leverage as part of competing with you.
That's great. Thanks so much.
That was great. So on that note, Ravi, could you maybe share a little bit more about Sesame and how you guys think about user acquisition, I would say from a demand side?
Yeah, I think from a demand side, there's of course performance marketing. That's always going to be a part, especially in the early days of a marketplace, of building up things and also proving out the marketplace. It's you're basically trading dollars for demand at increasingly hard rates to do profitably, but it's a good way to sort of figure out, can you make the market and can you add value on both sides of the equation? I think companies should continue to spend time on SEO. There are opportunities there, and if you can do well there, even if it's only across some subset of queries, it's always good to have that sort of base of organic demand coming in. In terms of paid marketing, like you really need to think very differently about Facebook versus Google. Those are different types of intent and very different abilities to target. I think for customers that want to have a direct relationship with a certain, whether the demand side or the supply side, there's a question of, should you have an app and how do you market that app? The nice thing about having an app that gets onto people's phones is that then you sort of have another demand channel, which is that you are resident on people's phones. And then I think there's a whole set of things around video-based marketing, YouTube, influencer-based marketing that have become increasingly important. Does that answer the question? Or were there other things that you were thinking of?
Yeah, no, that was great. Yeah, so cool. Thanks for sharing on that. So
yeah, absolutely.
Hey, Tomas, did you want to come on?
Yep. Yeah. How's it going? Hey, Ravi. My name is Tomas. I'm founder of Marketplace.
Hey, Tomas.
Yep. So I'm the founder of a marketplace called Simple Surf. What we do is connect surfers who are looking for an easier way to store their boards by the ocean with beachside homeowners that have some unused property space and are looking for some passive income. So I had a couple questions, specifically given your diversity of experience in different product functions at very different types of marketplaces. A couple different questions. One is more tactical and the other is more organizational. So for the tactical, do you have any, have you found any guidance or best practices around the process of taking in user feedback and most effectively prioritizing product features? Because I would imagine that specifically at Sesame, given a very wide range of different user types, the process of taking everything in and prioritizing accordingly can be really, it would require like a pretty sophisticated approach. And then the other question is more on organizational design. Have you found any trends or have you seen any best practices around where product fits within organizational structures? So for specifically like who product reports to and what KPIs really drive their focus?
I think so. First, on the organizational side, I think products should report directly to the CEO. It's especially for these types of businesses, it's such a critical part of whether or not the business is going to work, that it's important for it to have CEO level exposure. In a lot of marketplace companies, I've actually seen kind of the product organization serve more of an operational role and be the glue that's connecting all of the different pieces together. So that's really, really important. I've also seen like product reporting into marketing or product reporting into engineering. I think that's less ideal. I think ultimately that doesn't that sort of subsumes product into these other functions, and then it's not getting the level of attention that it needs to be successful. And then ultimately, like, the quality of the product is really important in terms of making the market and getting the marketplace to work well. And then specifically in terms of user research, I think user research is incredibly important. I have an article on my site about the 3 pillars of product decision making. So one of them is product managers use intuition, product managers use user research, and product managers use data. And ultimately striking a balance between all 3 of those different pillars can be really challenging. But it's important because that's how you get to the best decisions. That's how you triangulate a decision that really makes sense for the business and for the customer. And what I found is that PMs and companies tend to bias towards one type of decision making versus another. Like, some analytical companies look at the data and they spend way too little time talking to customers. Some research-oriented companies talk to customers all the time, but then do exactly what they say. They don't season that with some intuition and really help figure out not just what the customer's saying, but what their true underlying need is. So striking a balance between those things is really important. Oftentimes, I think today there's an overemphasis on analytics and an underemphasis on user research. And so I think just the fact that you're talking about user research and thinking about how to do it better puts you in sort of in a distinct class relative to a lot of other companies. In terms of how to do user research well, I think one is, I think part of it's not that complicated. Like, just talk to your customers. Yes, there's certain methodologies that work well, sometimes focus groups work well, sometimes usability tests work well. All that stuff is great. It can get you to, improvements in sort of incremental insight. But, just 90% of the value is just talking to customers. And I think that's one of the reasons that a lot of startups in the early days are able to disrupt big companies, because big companies have made it really difficult and expensive to talk to customers. They have a lot of policy rules around it. You got to get approval for doing research, where startups are really close to their customers. Oftentimes the founders of startups are the customers themselves. And so because there's that flow of information, they're able to get to a disruptive insight that the bigger companies can't get to. And they can get to that quickly and build a really interesting business off of it. So the first thing is, don't overcomplicate it. Just talk to your customers. I think as a good cadence, you should have customer conversations once a week and go from there. And if you have that sort of weekly cadence, that creates this really nice flywheel where as soon as a question comes up, you can talk to customers about the answer and factor that in, versus, a lot of times companies will do user research every couple of months or maybe once a quarter. And then these sort of questions build up. And by the time you answer them, it's too late to actually factor them into the product process. And then specifically in terms of how you do that well, there's an interesting book called The Mom Test, which does a great job of talking about some of the things that you can do to optimize those conversations so that you're getting really deep sort of causal insight rather than getting the surface level concerns that customers have.
Perfect. Thanks so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for asking that too, because I wasn't going to let us go the whole chat with that without mentioning the 3 pillars post. So
thanks. Awesome. Good content plug.
Yeah, right. Definitely going to share that in the show notes. So cool. So I think we had a question from, let's see here. Hey, Dan, did you want to come on?
Sure. Thank you so much, Ravi. And by the way, that book was called The Mom Test.
It's called The Mom Test. Yeah, I can share a link in Zoom. Give me 1 second.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, go ahead with the question.
My marketplace is called BookYA. It's a live appearance marketplace for professional authors to do video events with their readers, and it's ticketed. We launched it in May and built it largely during coronavirus. And consumer behaviors have really changed during coronavirus, especially the authors on book tours and stuff like that. And now we're at a point where there's Zoom fatigue, and 1 million authors are doing events with many different providers, but they're highly curated. They're not marketplaces, most of these. They're bookstores, and the authors are being interviewed by the bookstore owner or whatever. And one of the things I am having a hard time doing, we have a little bit of a head start, and for 20 years, my co-founder, my wife and I She's been running a very successful award-winning literary series that gets great authors. So we have great authors, and weekly their literary series is running on the marketplace. But outside of that, I'm looking for ways to promote, to get users, to get other authors and readers to kick the tires and try it. One of the things that I'm experimenting with is using middlemen. On the website, authors have the ability to on their author page, create a link so that buyers, readers are one click away from buying the book, so they can actually help local bookstores. And what I'm hoping to do is have the bookstores be a middleman to help promote within social media or email marketing within their own community these events on behalf of authors. So I wanted to see if you were familiar with marketplaces or had any suggestions about marketplaces that have an integrated middleman that way and incent them to try to promote, like in my case, promote these events, these live events. I was wondering if you had that relationship with healthcare providers, if they were sort of a middleman between the doctors and your market, doctors and patients, for example.
There are some cases where that happens. Oftentimes there'll be like doctors groups that then promote, that then they sign up to Sesame and then they promote Sesame for their doctors. And so that is kind of one area where that happens. There's also, like, you can think about the promotions on Instagram or other places. Oftentimes Instagram influencers will have other companies that they're working with to help promote them, or music artists will have other companies. So I think if you were to take a look at the influencer ecosystem, there would be some examples where you do have like a third party that's focused on promoting. It does. I think that this dynamic does happen. I'm having trouble thinking of like a really good example of it. But I think there are middlemen. Anytime you have like a really valuable marketplace with two sides, there'll be people that are looking to put themselves into the marketplace to make problems easier for one side or the other. I think one interesting example of that are sort of Airbnb aggregators that have come up that do property management for people that have Airbnb properties. And so it is really interesting to think about, okay, you've got supply and demand. Who are the other players in the marketplace that can make that marketplace more valuable? I think there are good examples. I'm just, good ones escaping me right now.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. We're almost wrapping up on time here. But yeah, Ravi, is there any kind of last bit of maybe kind of insights that you want to leave with us?
I think the biggest insight that I have from product overall is that it really comes down to empathizing with the customer. And if you can empathize with the customer, really understand the thing that they're trying to solve for, then you can build a really valuable product and brand around that. And it's just a human thing. It's really like easy to start thinking about businesses and especially marketplaces mechanically and connecting supply and demand and looking at it in terms of ratios and metrics, and forget that there's real people that are connecting to each other. And that as a result of those real people connecting to each other, there's a valuable transaction that's happening that's sort of incidental to that connection. I think one of the best examples of this, which I talk about in the 3 Decisions post, is the vacation rental marketplace space had existed for a long time. You had big players like HomeAway and VRBO, and they really treated the transaction between a renter and a property owner as like a sort of sterile transaction between two entities. And Airbnb reframed that transaction not as a sterile transaction between a renter and a rentee, but as a human transaction between a host and a guest. Even the terms that they use are very human. And so by reframing that vacation rental transaction in terms of its human components, they were able to massively increase the addressable space for that business and really disrupt the vacation rental space in a way that I think was completely unexpected for people in the travel industry and the vacation rental industry. And so I think that's ultimately a really important lesson for marketplace founders, is to not lose sight of the fact that ultimately, as a marketplace founder, you're trying to connect to people. That's really pure in social and Tinder. It gets less pure in business marketplaces, but it's still as important. And if you can reframe that transaction in a very human way, that can often lead to important insights. And that's one of the reasons that user research is so important.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thanks for leaving us with that. And that's a great example for it too. So yeah, I feel like we could go on for quite a bit, but I really appreciate joining us. And this is definitely a super insightful chat. So no, we all appreciate it. And so time for a quick little plug. Where can we keep up with you?
Yeah, so I've got a site, so ravimehta.com. I'll leave the URL in the chat, so you can keep up with me there. I've been writing occasionally there, so I've got a few posts there. I'm trying to write more there, and then also, feel free to reach out. I'm very accessible. I'm in the Slack channel. You can also feel free to email me directly. My email is on the website, and I'll leave it in the chat as well.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Ravi. I really appreciate it. This is great to have you join us here today. So
excellent. Thanks for inviting me. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. So
see you guys.
All right. See you in Slack.